that Darwin had. And one of those observations was the fact that for, I don't know, long time, long before he was born, and he was born in the 1800s, human beings had been modifying species by selecting those that had the traits that they were interested in, and then selectively breeding them. So, in other words, the animals that lived the longest or produced the most meat for a family would be the ones that would provide this would be selected for the next generation, or plants, the ones that were the healthiest, the ones that had the best fruit. The seeds from that one would be used for the next generation. And so that is what he called artificial selection, or what we call artificial selection. It's selecting for some trait that humans want. And that could be, like I said, it could be a bigger fruit, more sturdy livestock, more healthy livestock, whatever the trait happened to be. And he contrasted that with natural selection. Natural selection was the idea that we're going to talk about right after this. But let's look at artificial selection one more time. So, for example, you can't even recognize these things anymore. But wild mustard is the predecessor for kale, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, broccoli, and kohlrabi. And so depending on which plants you use from generation to generation, you could select for things like, if you wanted just really leafy, then you got the kale. Or if you really wanted just the buds, you wanted big buds, you would select the plants that had the biggest buds, and eventually you would get Brussels sprouts. And so they all came from the wild mustard. And this is an example of artificial selection. So we selected for a particular trait, and it gave us a different outcome over generations. So Darwin, in his looking at the way this had happened artificially, he drew a couple of observations. First of all, members of a population often vary in their inherited characteristics. So in the plants that we were talking about, some of them had more leaves than others. Some of them had more sprouts than others. Or you could look at, if you're looking at, for example, dogs, maybe you want, if you get a litter of puppies, I'll go back to what I know, which are dogs. Dogs in a litter are not going to be the same. Some of them are going to be more outgoing, more social. Some are going to be more reserved. Every dog is a little bit different. So there's a variation. Right? There's variation in populations. And he's got an example here, or out of the textbook, of ladybugs. Got a species of ladybugs, and you can see they're very different. Coloration's different. The number of spots that they have are very different. And that's just on the outside. All species can produce more offspring than the environment can support. So, it's often in a litter that you don't have 100% survival. You may get one of the offspring that doesn't actually make it. Okay, they don't get to the point where they're adults, and if they don't reach adulthood, then they can't reproduce. So they don't get to survive to the point where they can reproduce. That's kind of an important point. So those were his observations, just from looking at artificial selection and looking at the environment around him. And then from that, he inferred that, okay, well, it makes sense if you are an individual that inherits a trait that gives you a better probability of surviving, then you're likely, and reproducing, then you're likely to leave more offspring behind than other individuals that are not as well adapted. So if there's some trait that gives you more resistance to disease, and you don't get a disease that others do, then you would have more offspring, and those offspring would then leave behind more offspring. So over generation after generation, you would propagate that particular favorable trait, whatever it would happen to be. The second inference then is that unequal ability would lead to an accumulation of favorable traits in a population over time. So this is the whole survival of the fittest idea, right? if you are more adapted to an environment, you're more likely to live, to reproduce, and that generation will live and reproduce, and it'll just kind of snowball, and you'll get these favorable traits in a particular environment, a particular population. Darwin was influenced by Thomas Malthus, who was known for his studies on population and the idea that populations often increase faster than food supplies do in a human population. And so, not everyone in a human population survives. Who survives? And there's different traits that make survival more possible. So if some heritable traits are advantageous, and I just bolded this, it's not bold in your notes, these traits will produce more offspring, and the next generation will have a higher percentage of that population will now have those favorable traits. They still will get some of those traits that are not as desirable, but you'll get more of the favorable traits as you go on and on from generation to generation. The process increases the frequency of individuals with favorable adaptations and explains why individuals or organisms become increasingly well suited to their environment. Some key features of selection, natural selection. We already talked about if you have heritable traits, you're more likely to survive and reproduce. Natural selection increases the frequency in a given environment. This given environment is kind of a key point. Favorable in a given environment, because if the environment changes over time, then what is adaptive might change too. And so what is favorable might change as well. So we're seeing with climate change that obviously weather patterns are very different. We don't even really know what that means, but they are different. We're getting colder weather, we're getting warmer weather, we're in general getting more extreme weather. And so some traits that might have survived in species before might not be as adaptive because they were more set for a stable environment. And now all of a sudden we've got these drastically changing environments, and that might take a different set of characteristics to adapt and survive. I love this picture. This is an example of natural selection. These are two bugs. I don't know if you can see them from here, but it's really hard to see this one here. His little eyes are up here, and there's his antenna up here, a little nose. He's got a little arm here extending out. Same thing with this one. This one's really hard to see. This is his butt back here. These are his two front arms up here. But they look just like the flower or the plant. Okay, and that didn't happen overnight. And that didn't happen. It did happen by chance, but the chance was that if you're a bird and you're trying to pick off something that is on a plant and it looks dissimilar, that's going to be the first thing that draws your eye, and that's going to be the first thing that causes you to take it. But if you look very similar, and obviously they didn't start this way, they started off as maybe just a little bit greener, a little bit shaped differently, and then over time, the adaptations became better and better. Now, there's a few things to note about this. First of all, populations evolve, not individuals. So an individual doesn't evolve in its lifetime to look like the last two pictures that we had. It's also important to remember that this is only going to happen with the traits that you have in a population. So if a trait doesn't exist, if there is no resistance to a particular disease, then it's not going to matter if the environment changes and that disease becomes prominent, because now nobody has it. And if no one has it, then there's going to be no adaptation. The whole species is going to suffer and going to probably perish. Okay, so you've got to have, and some people are like, well, I think humans could fly one day. Well, I don't really know that we have that genetic ability in our DNA, right? I mean, people can't fly. No one can fly. People can run faster than others, but people can't fly. So at this point, we don't have that trait. So there's no way of that happening to us. Now, we're going to talk about transformation, and transformation could be, now all of a sudden we get some traits in there that are introduced to our genome that would allow us to fly. But right now, we don't have that in our genome, so flying is not going to be something we're going to be doing anytime soon. So in terms of evidence, the one thing that I didn't talk about yesterday and I really wanted to was, I got kind of sidetracked, was the idea of evolution versus religion or creationism or intelligent design is kind of the latest reiteration of that. And the reason we teach evolution is because it is a very well documented, very well supported theory, like gravity. And creation is not. And that does not mean that God does not exist. It just means that from a science-y standpoint, it's really hard to give support to that. Sophia?
Christians don't believe in the creation story. It's just a story. I'd like to point that out. They actually support.
And that depends on what Christian you
well, that's true.
As well. But the other thing, you're right. Thank you for pointing that out. One of the other things that I wanted to point out was I actually Googled this about the Pope, and I asked Google basically, does the Pope believe in evolution? And the Pope's statement was something to the effect that let's just look it up because I'll slaughter it otherwise. Pope evolution stance. That isn't what I used before, so. The Big Bang Theory and evolution do not contradict the idea of creation, the Pope has said. And basically, if I remember what I read was the idea that God is very complex, and if God is that complex, that's the quote I wanted. Evolution in nature is not inconsistent with the notion of creation. Warning against thinking of God's act of creation as God being a magician with a magic wand that can do everything. So I thought that was kind of powerful. And there are many scientists who are very devout in their religious beliefs and also believe in evolution as well. So for what that's worth. Yeah, I did not know that. Cool. Very cool. So with that said, there are 4 basic patterns of data, and we could go on for an entire lifetime talking about them, but we are going to talk about them a little bit. First one we're going to talk about is direct observations, and this I'll give you a couple of examples, and one is going to be the soapberry bug, just what you wanted to know about, right? So let's show you the picture of the soapberry bug there over on the left-hand side of your screen. This little guy has a little proboscis, which is just a fun word to say, and he's got to stick that down into the soap or into the thing that he's eating. In this case, it's what's called balloon vine fruit. And it's important for him. He's got to get at the seeds in the center. So he needs to have the right length of, they call them beaks, to get to the center of the fruit to get the seeds to feed and to live and to survive. And so in southern Florida, there is balloon vine fruit, and that's shown here at the top. And this is a histogram showing you the size of the beak versus the number of individuals. So it's basically showing you that the more the average is, I don't even know what the average is there. What does it say? Like 8.5 millimeters is how long the beak is for that particular species or subspecies, I should say, of soapberry bug. But then in Central Florida, there was a new species of fruit that was introduced, and it became dominant. It actually took over the balloon vine fruit, and there weren't many of those. And instead, there were these golden, they called them golden rain trees, and they had a smaller fruit. And so because it was a smaller fruit, now the soapberry bugs, if their beak was too long, it would go through and it would go through the fruit and it wouldn't actually get the seeds out. So over generations, what they found was, and this happened pretty quickly, is the average length of the beak became, like 6 3/4. So it went from like 8.5 to 6 3/4, something like that. Showing that in a very short period of time, if the environment changed, in this case, the fruit that the bug was eating changed, so did the bugs. Because the ones who had the longer beaks couldn't survive and they couldn't reproduce and they didn't leave behind as many offspring. Okay. And that's just what these slides are saying. So the soapberries use their beak, it's not really a beak, to feed on the seeds. It's most effective when the beak length is closely matched to the seed depth within the fruit. And they've seen this, they saw this in Florida, but they also saw it in other places around the world as well. That's important. So if the environment changes, the bug changes in response to that environmental change. Let's see, where do I want to go? Oh, yeah. So another one that is scary is evolution of drug-resistant bacteria. Bacteria reproduce about every 20 minutes. And because they reproduce so quickly, any mutation that you would see in bacteria could become prominent very, very quickly. And a lot of those mutations aren't going to be adaptive or have any consequence, but occasionally they do. So there's one strain of this bacteria that we commonly refer to as MRSA, methicillin-resistant SRES. You just need to remember MRSA. MRSA is a flesh-eating bacteria, that is really hard to treat. And you see it oftentimes in hospitals. Max, our hospital dude, is like, yeah, we do. And the reason, well, there's a few things to this. So it became resistant to penicillin about 2 years after it was introduced. After penicillin was introduced, about 2 years later, MRSA became resistant to it. And then another, I don't know, what is that, 14 years later, did I do that right? It also became resistant to methicillin. And you don't need to remember that part of it. But my point is that these are two really prominent antibiotics, methicillin and penicillin, and they don't work on MRSA. And you now have to really use a cocktail of antibiotics that are intravenous. So it's being given through the vein, and it's really hard to treat. So methicillin works by, I do want you to know this, methicillin works by inhibiting an enzyme that bacteria uses to produce their cell walls. So basically, if you inhibit the enzyme, the bacteria can't produce cell walls and it can't make more copies of itself. And if it can't make more copies of itself, it's going to cease to exist. So what MRSA has figured out is, because of some mutation, it uses a different enzyme in its cell wall production. So the methicillin doesn't work on it because it's a different enzyme. And remember, that whole shape thing, you have to have the right shape. And if suddenly we change the shape of the enzyme, we also are going to change the ability of an antibiotic to work on it, because now the antibiotic's looking for a different shape. It's not looking for the correct shape. So when exposed to methicillin, MRSA strains are more likely to survive than non-resistant. And now today, we see that there's tons of antibiotic resistant to MRSA has antibiotic resistance to most antibiotics, which is really not good. And all of that is because of the fact that we use so many antibiotics. There's pressure, right? If you are a little bacteria and you're trying to survive, and you're in an environment where there's a lot of antibiotics, if you have you're more likely to survive if you have that methicillin resistant enzyme, if you produce that. And if you don't, you're probably not going to survive. You're not going to thrive. You're not going to you're not going to you're not going to survive. A new antibiotic called Teixobactin was discovered in 2015, and it still today is showing some pretty good ability to treat infections, especially things like MRSA. But this is hard because the other thing that is kind of not really part of this unit, but important in terms of just society and whatever, and important to you, is the fact that infections that are treated by antibiotics, they don't last long, right? They go away quickly, right? So if you've got an infection, you take an antibiotic, you take it for a couple of weeks, make sure you take it for the entire time, by the way, because if you don't, then your body will, the ones that are resistant will come back, and they'll come back stronger the next time around. So you want to make sure you take every antibiotic that you're given, whatever the doctor gives you. However, what's happening is drug companies, it takes a long time for a drug to be available for human consumption or for use with human beings. It might take 10, 15 years for that to happen. That is a ton of money that has to go into research and development, animal testing, approval to get it to come to humans. If you are taking an antibiotic and you're only taking it for a couple of weeks, you are not, in the eyes of the drug companies, you're not cost effective because you're not taking a drug long term. So they're not making a profit. So there's not a lot of companies that are developing new antibiotics, because if it takes 15 years to bring it to market, they're not going to get their money back from that. So a lot of companies won't make antibiotics, and won't try new antibiotics. And that's a problem for us because of this whole resistance that we're seeing. Now, question. If we, this is kind of I'm not quite sure how to ask this to get the answer I'm looking for. What would happen to bacteria? What would happen to MRSA if we stopped using antibiotics completely? Anybody know? Yeah. So if we didn't have any antibiotics, MRSA wouldn't be a problem. MRSA is a problem because of the selective pressures. No other bacteria can survive except for MRSA. So MRSA wouldn't be as big of a problem because there would be other bacteria out there. Now, that doesn't mean that those other bacteria wouldn't be also deadly and also a problem, but we wouldn't have this one huge super bug that is an issue because of the fact that we're using antibiotics for so many things that we're creating bugs that are resistant to those antibiotics. Okay. Natural selection doesn't create new traits or edits or selects. But it edits or selects for traits that are already present in the population. Like I said, if it's not there, you're out of luck. So before that mutation happened for methicillin, so that the enzyme was different, it wasn't a deal. It wasn't a big thing. But then once it evolved, now in the genome, in the gene sequence, there was a gene that was more adaptive, more survivable. Okay, at some point, these slides kind of repeat on themselves, so I'm just going to go on. Okay, so that is our examples of direct evidence. So we've got the MRSA example and the soapberry bugs example. So if they ask you a question about, give me an example of, there's your answer. There's also evidence when you look at anatomical and molecular homologies. What the heck is a homology? Homology is showing that two or more species came from a common that they share a common ancestor. And so the like quintessential example of that is what we call homologous structures, which is where they have they anatomically resemble a variation on a theme, and that shows a common ancestry. Let me show you an example of that. So the most common example is one bone, two bone, many bone. And so if you look at the picture here, I have a human, a cat, a whale, and a bat. And they all at the top have one bone. This one bone here. Oh, that's not what I wanted. Come on, pen. They have the one bone. Oh, it's a little nub there. One bone. There are two bones here. It's kind of hard to see. Two bones here. Oh, that was not what I wanted. Two bones there. Two bones here. And then the last one, they have many bones down here. This piece, this piece, this piece, and this piece. Okay. One bone, two bone, many bone. So this shows that we all, human, cat, whale, and bat, we all share a common ancestor. Doesn't mean we came from bats. Doesn't mean we came from cats. It means that we have a common ancestor somewhere way, way back in time. Nothing close. You can also see this in embryology as well. You see those anatomical homologies that you don't see in adults. So when you look at embryos, a lot of times, for example, we have a post-anal tail when we are in utero. We also have pharyngeal arches. So we have these little arches that in fish are going to become gills. In us, they go away. We don't see them anymore. Occasionally, you will see somebody born with little slits, and then they can do something to cover that up. Or if you've got a little nub back here, they can take that off too. Okay. This is kind of fun and not necessary, but why not? Ready? Want to guess the embryo? Yeah, let's guess the embryo. Guess the embryo. Oh, wait, what? Okay. Oh, don't. Oh, there we go. Oh, wait. Okay. So, yeah, guess the embryo. Look, it's Nova and everything. It's like sciencey. Yeah. All right. You have an embryo here on the left, and you have. Oh, I want it to be the dog, and then you have to guess which one it is. Is it going to be the doggy, the goldfish, the bear? What kind of bear sits up like that? Or a mouse? Bear. Bear? Definitely goldfish. I'm hearing bear. Oh, it's not the bear.
It's the fish then.
It's the fish. Okay, it's fish.
Oh. Look at the face. It's the mouse.
It's a mouse. But okay, number two. Number two. Oh, that's just weird.
Well, that's a kangaroo.
That's a kangaroo. No. Top right, the sheep.
No, it's the bird. That's the sheep.
The sheep, the bird. Nobody wants a ferret.
I hope that's not a
Yeah, it's quail. All right, number three. How you doing so far?
Oh,
This one's a kind of a gimme. Well, sort of. A lizard? What about? So nobody thinks it's this one, huh? Okay. How about the parrot?
Maybe.
No, it's not a turtle. This is a guy. It's a turtle. Turtle. You can kind of see its shell here. It's got a little beak. It's got a tail. Turtles do have tails, by the way. Oh, this one's kind of hard, I think. I can't remember what this one is. Is it a pig? No, it's not a pig. Snail?
Yeah.
No, not a snail. It's a gecko? Gecko? Oh, it's a pig. Oh, it's a bat. Yeah. All right. Point is, these guys all look so similar. Initially. Oh, yeah, this one's kind of creepy, actually, if I remember right. He's got a little tail there. That looks like a human being to me. Does that look like a human to you? Yeah, it's gonna get creepy soon. Oh, look, he's got a little webbing. Aww. Oh, yeah, he's kind of getting ugly now. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
that looks like.
Oh, kind of gross. So point is that a lot of these traits, we call it, well, there's a phrase for it, but it won't mean anything to you, so I'm not going to tell you. But the idea is that a lot of the things that we have seen that are in our ancestry, we still see in our embryology. So it's still there, like those little pharyngeal slits that could become gills, but they don't become gills, right? And they disappear over time, but they are still in our genes. We've still got that information there. Here's the chick embryo and a human embryo. And they both have the little slits, and they both have a tail. All right. Vestigial structures. So vestigial structures are structures that are no longer functional, and they are remnants of something that was functional at one point in our past, in our ancestry. And again, and you can see this at a molecular level as well. These remnants of genes that we used to use but don't use any longer. You can think about, back to vestigial structures, though, you can think about wisdom teeth, for example. Would be an example. Appendix. Appendix was an important digestive feature or function, part of our functioning digestive system at one point. So were the teeth, but not anymore. Wisdom teeth. Wisdom teeth. Anybody not have wisdom teeth? Not born with them? Anybody? I know there are some people now being born without them. I mean, one of the things that, if you have wisdom teeth and you have them removed, then they're not a problem. Sometimes they can become a problem. But it's not that impactful because it doesn't necessarily impact our survival and our ability to reproduce. And if we still reproduce, you got them in there?
Yeah.
You got them? Need them out? I don't know. I mean, your dentist would tell you, but I don't know. Tonsils. I think tonsils do serve a purpose, but they are very commonly infected. And so it's kind of like there's other organs as well that you can live without, and tonsils are definitely one of them. I don't have tonsils. I had mine removed when I was like 5th grade or something. They didn't give me any ice cream. They told me they told me I was going to, and then they gave me Jell-O instead. I was like, that's gross. I was so mad. I was so mad with them, and they wouldn't let me keep them either. I wanted to keep my tonsils. They're like, no, can't. It's human waste. It's like, it's my tonsils. They're my tonsils. Not sure what the plural or singular is on that. Anyway, I'm going to stop there.